So, like I mentioned, what we're going to do is if you read the Stavro article at all, he talked about this process of basically going through a series of mics and finding out their, the way he describes it, like tactile index. Okay, does anybody know what tactile index means? Like, did anyone read that at all? Yeah, okay. So, tactile index, so in the rest of the week, we've talked about, in the other literature and reading, it talks about things like sensitivity, diaphragm, right? The transducer method, right? So is it using electrostatic? Is it using electromagnetic? We talked about microphone sensitivity, SPL, so sound pressure level, all those things. Today, we're just like not going to talk about that. And this experiment is more about how are we going to use these microphones musically. Okay, so one of the ways to do that is Stavro talks about using this test where we're basically going to speak into each microphone and then sort of compare the microphones to each other. So he was calling it the H factor, so like their hardness factor, and he was relating it to something called tactile index. So basically, tactile index is a very fancy word for if I sing, speak, or play an instrument into a microphone, how is that going to sit in a mix? So what does that really mean? Well, we'll do some recording here, and you'll notice that when we speak into some of the microphones, it's just like really intense, really piercing. And other times it seems a little bit more subdued. So if you think about it, the last time you heard a really great vocal on a recording, a lot of times you were like, wow, it just like sits right above the mix, or it sits right in the mix, like it sits in the right place in the mix. And it could be an instrument too, like it could be a guitar, that type of thing.
That was me doing the lab, literally.
Right, yeah, how to get that vocal to sit right? And I think with that lab, they were using the Neumann, or the Telefunken, it was at the Telefunken, like, factory studios, so they were doing that recording there.
Oh, I'm talking about the lab for this one.
Oh, well, yeah.
Oh, that was hard.
Yeah, right, so one of the ways you can sort of start that process is right in the recording process, say, okay, I want a vocal that's going to sit very forward in the mix. So I might want to use a microphone that has a higher H factor. Okay. By the way, the H factors are completely made up. Okay? But it's a system to be like, this mic is an H10, meaning it's really going to have something stand out in a mix, versus maybe the 58 is only like an H5. Okay. We'll decide today as we're like listening. We're going to record everything and then sort of take a listen to it in the studio. And, you know, we'll decide what microphones we think, sound a certain way. This is the SM58. Has everyone seen one of these before?
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Has anyone ever seen one of these where the grill on it is not bent?
I feel like that's a good question.
I feel like it comes out of the factory. They like hit it on the table
Quality
and like,
control.
it's good to go. Let's ship it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. The SM58 is here, and then this is the SM57, okay? Usually the 58 is for vocals or for, speaking into it. It's usually held like this. So notice it's top address here, so you're talking into it that way. Sometimes you see somebody like trying to talk into it this way or stuff like that. And those are always funny videos to find on the internet. The 58 and the 57 are very similar microphones. One's traditionally used for vocals, the other one is used for instruments, that type of thing, but I've seen it used on vocals as well. Here's the thing though. So here's this microphone, right? And then if we take a look at this one, I'm gonna do something which you're totally allowed to do, is take the actual top off. So if I just spin it,
What?
look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, they look the same. Yeah.
They look exactly the same. So the idea is they're very similar in design. So what makes this more suited for vocals? Well, part of that is the capsule that's on the top of it. I knew one engineer who did live sound. He would go out and get different colored screens. And the reason he would do that way on stage, if you had like a band or a group that would like run around and like swap microphones, he would always know which microphone was connected to which input. So it'd be like there was like the pink mic and the red mic and the blue mic.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was helpful for that. So really, if you think about it, the construction and design of these microphones are very similar. It's just that the capsule or the top on this is better suited for vocals, which kind of also tells you too, depending on how you use the 57, you could use it for vocals as well. So these are both dynamic microphones, right? They're dynamic. They use electromagnetic induction. So there's a coil of wire, magnets in there to help reproduce the sound. It's a diaphragm basically stuck on a magnet and a coil of wire. And as the diaphragm moves back and forth, it moves that magnet through the coil of wire, which gives us those plus and minus voltages, which gives us the compression, null, refraction, gives us our little electrical signal or representation of the sound waves or sine wave. So there's a very basic description of how that works. Definitely check out the lectures and stuff for more depth on that. So now we move into a different class of microphones. We move into our condenser microphones. This is the good old 414. The 414 is a pretty nice microphone. It's kind of the whatever you need it to be. People use it like for all different things. It has a very large condenser in here, or excuse me, large diaphragm. It uses the electrostatic principle, right? So that means it's tiny variations between the diaphragm and a charged backplate. And that's how it's actually interpreting the electrical signal from incoming sound waves. So, Quincy, we were talking a little bit about, is it the diaphragm size that actually makes the condenser mics more sensitive? Well, the diaphragms can be very small and very thin because all it has to do is move so slightly and a tiny variation in electrical signal can be picked up and then that can be sent through the mic. Where pretty much with these dynamic mics, the diaphragm size might be similar, but it has to be so much thicker because and then there's so much resistance. So when we talk about the sensitivity, these are going to be so less sensitive because you actually have to just physically move this whole like magnet on a diaphragm type thing, where this is just taking electrical differences between the front diaphragm and a charged backplate. Also, I'm saying charged backplate, so plus minus 48 volts, right? So that phantom power is what's charging that backplate. And for a good time, we could do it today too. If you have all your mic pre's on and you have Pro Tools Record enabled and you turn phantom power on, you can actually hear the phantom power charging up. And what's charging up? Well, there's a capacitor in the microphone and it's actually charging up that capacitor. In the UK, at one point, they used to call condenser microphones capacitance mics. So while they weren't brushing their teeth. All right. So this is going to be a huge hit in the UK, right? Okay. So we have another large diaphragm condenser. The cool thing, the big difference is, so this is about $1,000 microphone, and this is more around a $200 to $300 microphone. The big difference between the two is they're both large diaphragm condenser. The KSM32 is a very nice sort of U87 substitute. So it's a really nice vocal mic, kind of all around good. The real difference in price though between these two is that this has multiple polar patterns, the 414. So you can do an omni pattern, you can do a bidirectional, and then you can also just do a cardioid. I think it also has like a hypercardioid, which is like really focused. So really, the reason why this is almost like twice the price is because there's actually two diaphragms in here, and that's how it's doing either the omni, the bidirectional, or the cardioid polar pattern. Where this only has just one diaphragm, so it is just a cardioid pattern. If you look at the back of these mics too, you'll notice, so the thing I don't like about the new 414s is that in order to change the polar pattern, you have to turn the phantom on. Or the phantom power, which I actually don't like because that means that I have to plug the mic in, go walk into the studio, then walk all the way back, right? Yeah, how lazy can you be, right? Walk all the way back to then switch the polar pattern. What ends up happening, like in all seriousness, is I'll forget. And I'll be like, why does that mic sound so weird? And it's like, oh, I bet it's still on Omni or whatever I used last time. Also in the back, there is a pad, so we can actually lower the input of the mic if we have a very loud sound source. When we do drums later in the semester, we definitely will be using either the pads on the mic or on the mic pre's. And then we also have a filter here, so we could just start cutting off everything below 40 hertz. Let's see, 40 hertz, 80 hertz, and 160. So if you're doing a higher vocal and you just don't need any low end, you can start cutting it off at 40 or 80. I usually don't engage the filters. I usually do it after the fact, just in case. Because sometimes even with a very like high vocal or even a mid-range vocal part, there is a component in the low end that if you cut it out, you can't get it back. So remember, anything that we do here at the microphone level, that's destructive, like it's permanent. So if you cut everything below 160 on the mic, that's not something we can recreate later. I mean, maybe with some AI technology where it infers what the fundamental frequencies were. But anyways, barring that $1,000, $2,000 software, we could just like not put the switch on and save some time and money. The same thing with the KSM32. It also has a response here, or a filter, and it also has a pad. So this mic's pretty nice. I used to own one of these, like the studio version of that, which was I think closer to like $600, and it was just a nice vocal mic. I was pairing it with the old Focusrite Forte interfaces, which were the old blue ones that came in separate boxes, and it was pretty nice. It was trying to emulate sort of like a tube pre. So it was a nice pairing. I've since upgraded, but or moved on. So, by the way, as far as address, these are front address. So in other words, if you see the insignia here for AKG and for Shure is here in the front, so you speak into the front of these microphones. The next microphone is a very special microphone. I love these Royer 121s. They're great on any type of soft string instrument. Anything that's like kind of abrasive too, it calms it down a little bit. So I actually like using it quite a bit on guitar amps. And it's a little bit more robust than the Cascade mics I was telling you that say don't use on guitar amps. They're a little bit more robust, and you can really jam them in close to just the cone of the speaker on the amp, and get a really nice kind of warm sound.
It sounds like it would be good for violin.
Absolutely. Somebody recently sent me an email saying, hey, I'm doing a violin. And yeah, I gave him like the entire spiel about, where to put it. And with violin too, like having it a little bit further above the instrument is actually a really nice sound. Especially because the violin is really pretty, but sometimes if you use the wrong mic, like if you put a 414 on it, it could get really brittle and kind of squeaky, and squeaky violin is usually not what people want. Sometimes they do. By the way, this is a ribbon microphone. So it is different than the condenser microphones, and it is different than these microphones. However, it is still technically a dynamic mic because there's still a magnet and a coil of wire, so it's still using electromagnetic induction. However, instead of there being this hardened by the cruel world diaphragm, it's this tiny ribbon. And so if you can think about it, if it's a tiny ribbon that can kind of move back and forth and influence the magnet and the coil of wire, it's going to be a lot more sensitive than this really hard diaphragm. So the ribbon mic was actually the first mic before any of these mics. This was the first mic, and this is still like a really great way to capture sort of the kind of warmth of the dynamic mics, but give you a little bit more sensitivity. So like Frank Sinatra like paid for all of his mansions by singing into ribbon microphones, and some of those had a much larger ribbon, and but that's that characteristic kind of warm tone. I Did It My Way, that song or something like that. Were sung into those type of microphones.
Great song too.
Yeah, he did it his way with the ribbon mic. Okay, the next microphone here is the MA300. And the MA300 is a new vintage mic, meaning Mojave Audio is a newer manufacturer that part of their mission is to make new mics that replicate old mics. So you were talking about having like a microphone library, right? Yeah. So at Blackbird Studios in Nashville, they have this closet of microphones, and you can actually rent the microphones. I think you have to like leave the rights to your like first child or something, or like your hand or something like that. But you can rent microphones from there, and so they have this closet of just like all these like awesome vintage mics. So there has been this need and this desire to have vintage mics, but if you get a mic that's already $3,000 and then you put 20 to 30 years on it, and it's known to be a fantastic mic, then the price tag goes way up. Right. So Mojave Audio tried to like do this idea where, okay, we're gonna have ones that sort of replicate the vintage sounds, but are actually pretty affordable. So most of the Mojaves are actually pretty affordable for what they can do. I think this one closely models the C12, the AKG C12, which is still a microphone now. It's sort of a large diaphragm condenser microphone. It's this long tube mic, or like a cylindrical tube mic, not tube mic. And it has a very bright, very crisp sound. And so for vocals, this microphone, especially for the certain type of vocals you're looking for, a really bright, really crispy one, the C12 or this Mojave Audio would be really good. I'm not sure what they were trying to replicate with this microphone, but for my ears, it sounds like a C12, which they might disagree with. But once again, this one has a pad on it, as well as some filters as well. This one is, of course, front address. We use the old golden rule, which is if the label's on the front, that's the side you make sound into. This one, as we mentioned before here, has this extra box. This was pretty common in older vintage microphones, to have a separate power supply and tube amplifier. The reason they didn't put the tube amplifier in the microphone is, well, they used to, and at one point they did, but the microphone would have been very, very large then, right, to house all this inside the microphone. And what's another reason, do you think, that they didn't want to put the tube or the amplifier inside the microphone?
Does it make noise?
It does. It gives off heat, which electronics do not like heat.
Yep.
And actually, heat is sometimes expressed as noise as well. So yeah, it's going to give off noise and heat. So it'll melt the diaphragm, and then also you'll hear this weird buzzing sound as it melts it, right? Yep. So they've separated it into this box. We mentioned earlier turning the box on, like plugging the box in and warming up the tube ahead of time, is actually a really great idea. Like I said, when I was using that old Sony C3, I would, like 30 minutes to 40 minutes before I was going to use it, I would plug the box in and just let it start to warm up. Because that one was like really sensitive to, after half an hour, it was really sounding great. But then after like 2 hours, it started to, sometimes it would overheat a little bit. So yeah, we said too here, there's the polar pattern adjustment that you can make here. So if you have it straight up at 12 o'clock, it will be cardioid, and if we go all the way to the left, it'll be omni, and all the way to the right, bidirectional. The weird thing about this is you can do the in-between, so you kind of say I want it to be quasi-cardioid, omni, that type of thing, or kind of cardioid, sort of bidirectional. We do have to use that other multi-pin microphone cable to go from the microphone to the amplifier, and then we can just come a normal XLR out into our mic panel. The Mojave Audio, we'll hear, it has a very bright, very sort of crisp sound. Also, because there's the tube involved, you are getting some of that warmth. So it's a weird, like, it's bright, it's warm, it's bright, it's warm, which to me is a C12. Like, that's, for me, that's kind of, you're getting this really bright high end. A lot of the Jay-Z records were done where he was spitting into the C12. And so it gives it a really crisp sound, but also warm. Here's a microphone. The next one, you should not be talking into this microphone. It is designed for a kick. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And it's sometimes called the football mic. It's the AKG D112. It's probably the most common kick microphone. And the idea is, if you look at the sound hole of the drum set there, or in the kick drum, a lot of people just like cram it in the hole and say, okay, we're done. We've got our kick sound. When we do drums, we'll be a little bit more scientific about where we place it, or a little bit more musical than that. But yeah, there's mics like this. Sony, or excuse me, not Sony. Shure even makes, I think it's the 52A that they make, which is like a cheaper version of this. But yeah, Shure sells a whole kit, I think for a few $100s, that gives you a bunch of 57s, some tom mics, as well as their Beta 52A, so that you could like have a quick drum setup, that type of thing. And it's fairly inexpensive, and most of the time when we learn about drums, a lot of times there's 57s on a lot of the drums, because they're just really good. The Shures are really good at handling the high SPLs. So yeah, the D112, we'll talk into it. It's going to be a disaster, because the idea of this microphone is in the diaphragm size and in its construction, it's only supposed to be affected by very large, low sound waves. So really large waveforms are going to be big enough, and high pressure levels are going to be strong enough to actually move that diaphragm back.
So I shouldn't be using this for opera.
No.
For my voice personally.
Well, you could. See, here's the thing. Somebody would be like, why did the vocals sound so cool on this recording or whatever?
Yeah.
And you'd be like, I don't know, I just used some mics. A lot of times, like using the wrong mic in a situation.
Cool sound.
Yeah. So we were talking about like secret weapons. Like everyone has this like broken mic or this like weird mic that they found at a tag sale. And sometimes it can give you a really distinct sound. So like that's another really good point, is that these microphones are sort of your first look at whatever sound source, or they're your first tool. So they're kind of like paintbrushes that you can say, I'm going to pair this vocal with this microphone. Last but not least, the Rode NT5. I love a pencil condenser as drum overheads. So not having the $3,000 KSM 184s, the Neumann microphones, these are a great substitute. They give you a lot of the flexibility of having a pencil condenser. I like to use them in stereo pairs, and we'll talk about that when we do drums. But so this is just a fantastic substitute for that. I believe you can take the caps off of these as well. So let me do that real quick. This is not ideal. So yeah, you can take them off. And if you do, I believe with these you can swap out different polar patterns. This one has a cardioid polar pattern on it. So I think you can go and get different capsules.
That's interesting.
I know there's like this microphone brand called the Sheps Colette microphone where you could do this. So if you're doing like live sound or location audio, you can bring the different clips or the different capsules. So depending if you want like a cardioid polar pattern or omni, you can just switch the capsule. So, and I'm pretty sure you can do that with the NT5s. Maybe not. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they're cheaper. But I don't know why they'd let you take the top off if that was the case. Great, so these are all the microphones. So basically what we're going to do is we're gonna go through each microphone. And like Stavros says, for this test, we're just gonna count down from 10 on each microphone. So just like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll just go through and based on speaking into each mic, we're gonna kind of solo each one after the fact and kind of hear how they sound. And so we're gonna create our own sort of imaginary H factor sort of spectrum, right? Where what's the brightest or what's the most intense microphone that's gonna give us the most tactile index, or what's gonna make the vocal or whatever's going into it really stand out, and what microphones are duller or kind of push things back further. So that's pretty much the experiment. We'll take a look at that.